I never meant to find it. It was just a wrong turn, a simple mistake on a quiet road late at night. The highway had stretched endlessly behind me, the glow of city lights long since swallowed by the horizon. When the GPS lost signal, I told myself to keep driving until I found a gas station or a sign, anything to point me back in the right direction. Instead, the forest closed in. The road narrowed, the air thickened, and then, like a scene from an old horror movie, the trees parted. There it was, a town that shouldn't exist. It wasn't on any map I'd ever seen, and I couldn't remember passing any signs for it. Rows of houses stood like sentinels, their windows dark and empty. The streetlights flickered, casting faint halos onto cracked pavement. There were no cars, no people, no sound. It was the kind of quiet that made your ears ring, the kind that felt unnatural. I should have turned around. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, but instead I pulled the car over. Something about the silence held me there, like invisible hands had gripped the wheel and refused to let go. Stepping out of the car, the air felt different. It wasn't just cold, it was heavy, pressing against my skin like the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes. I walked down the main street, drawn forward despite the growing sense of unease. The houses were in perfect condition, as though their owners had only just stepped out. And yet, there was no sign of life. A rocking chair on a porch swayed gently, though there was no wind. A child's bike lay discarded on the sidewalk, its tires caked with rust. At the center of the square stood a bulletin board. From a distance, it looked ordinary, a place where people pinned announcements or lost dog posters. But as I got closer, I saw that the photographs on it weren't normal. They were old, faded snapshots of families and celebrations, but every face had been scratched out, replaced with deep gouges in the paper. The deeper I looked, the more unsettling it became. The shadows seemed to deepen around me, and I felt it. A presence, or maybe many presences, watching from somewhere I couldn't see. My pulse quickened, and I forced myself to look away. That's when I decided to leave. Enough was enough. But when I turned to go back to my car, the road I'd come in on was gone. In its place was a dense wall of trees, their branches twisted together like claws. Panic surged in my chest. I turned back toward the town, hoping to find another way out, but the air grew colder with every step, and then I heard it, a whisper. It was soft at first, like the wind rustling through leaves, but it quickly grew louder. The voices seemed to come from everywhere at once, surrounding me. They weren't speaking any language I recognized, but the tone was clear. It was a warning, or maybe a threat. My footsteps quickened, and so did the whispers. Shadows stretched across the ground, moving unnaturally, twisting and contorting as though they had a life of their own. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, but deep down, I knew better. The town wasn't abandoned. It was alive, and it didn't want me to leave. I found myself back at the square, breathing hard. The whispers had faded, replaced by a deep, oppressive silence. That's when I saw them, the figures. At first, they were just shapes, barely visible through the windows of the houses. But as I stood there, frozen in place, they began to move. One by one, they stepped into the street. Their movements were slow, deliberate, almost mechanical. Their faces were the worst part. They didn't have any. Where eyes, noses, and mouths should have been, there was only smooth, featureless skin. But they could see me. I could feel their gaze, cold and piercing. They didn't speak, but the air was heavy with their intent. I took a step back, then another, but they kept coming. Their silent procession felt like a funeral march, and I was the corpse they were after. I turned and ran, the sound of their footsteps echoing in my ears. I don't remember how I found my car. One moment I was running through the streets, the next I was gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands. The engine roared to life, and the road reappeared in front of me, as if it had been waiting all along. I didn't question it. I just drove, the tires screeching as I tore away from the town. In the rearview mirror, I could see the figures standing in the street, their featureless faces turned toward me. They didn't follow, but their stillness was almost worse. As the town disappeared behind me, I began to feel the first hint of relief. But then I saw it, reflected in the mirror. A face, pale and glowing faintly, staring at me from the back seat. Its lips twisted into a silent scream, and its empty eyes bore into mine. I slammed on the brakes, but when I turned around, the back seat was empty. I looked back at the road, heart racing, and saw that the mist was following me. The town may have let me leave, but I knew it wasn't done with me. Not yet.